Hey there, I'm a pastor, and however you found yourself here, you are welcome. Hear now the parable of the careless sower. Perhaps this parable from Luke's Gospel, chapter 8, just verses 4 through 8, will be familiar to you. My invitation, my hope, and my prayer is that you'll allow it to fall upon fresh ears. And it goes like this. When a great crowd was gathering and people were coming to Jesus from one city after another, he spoke to them in a parable. A farmer went out to scatter his seed. As he was scattering it, some fell on the path where it was crushed, and the birds in the sky came and ate it. Other seed fell on rock. As it grew, it dried up because it had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorns grew with the plants and choked them. Still other seed landed on good soil. When it grew, it produced 100 times more grain than was scattered. And as he said this, he called out, "Everyone who has ears should pay attention." Me, I probably relate most commonly to the rocky soil. Man, I can get excited about a new idea. My shoot will go up fast, my roots will be shallow, and then the Texas sun will show me how grave of a mistake I have made. I wonder if you have ever found yourself with hardened, rocky, or weed-riddled soil, or perhaps a little bit of all of them. Is that it to the parable? Are we either just elect to heaven to be good soil that receives the seed and produces 100-fold, or are we damned to hell and the state of our soil shows that the state of our soul is just no good? Well, I'm a Methodist pastor, so I believe deeply in free will, with all the good and the bad, the hard that we have to embrace that comes alongside of that. So I think we have to dig a little deeper, because let me tell you, I have dealt with all of this soil before. For a season in my life, I lived in an intentional Christian community, me and my husband did, with other wonderful people. And one of the things that we did was we turned all of the garden beds, all like 50 of them, from like rose garden, flower gardens, into growing gardens for an area of town that was a food desert at the time. And so we got real familiar with the soil, because we learned real fast it's all about the soil that sets up what's to come after. So I have watched good seeds get choked out by weeds. I have watched good seeds sprout too quickly with their root balls too shallow, and they do indeed die in that Texas sun. I've seen good seeds that we just like spilled on one of the gravel pathways. I've watched the birds come and pick them off and carry them off, or oftentimes it was the chickens that we had and they enjoyed when we made that mistake. And I've also seen what happens when seeds get planted in good soil. I have seen tomato plants grow to be 6 to 8 feet high and produce the best tomato you have ever had. And that we have such a bumper crop and a freeze is coming and we cannot get rid of all of the tomatoes that we have to our neighbors fast enough. What I've also seen in my work is I've seen people who have been choked out by the sin or the community that they surround themselves with. And they so desperately want to uproot those weeds from around them. I've seen someone excited to dive in to being a part of the community of the church, And then the joy quickly dissipates as the work and the consistency of the work begins. And they didn't really change other habits. And so the next thing pops up and they're off chasing it. I've seen when words of hope simply fall on souls hardened, not willing to receive them. And I've watched as they've blown away on the caress of a breeze from the wind or on the wings of birds. And I've also seen what happens when lives are truly changed, when Christ works in transformative ways in someone's life and they come to love people more deeply. They come to know God more intimately and they live and craft this life of beauty. So, what are we to do? How do we do this work? And here's the deal. Jesus knew who he was speaking to. He is speaking to an agrarian society. He is speaking to a group of gardeners and farmers. So he knows that they know, they have this intelligence about them of how you do the work of caring for soil. You're not going to have anything to produce food for you. The plants are not going to make it. The gardener and the farmer knows the secret, the answer to this parable, and Jesus knows that they know. So back when I was living in that house that we affectionately called the Swesley house, we became obsessed with sourcing the best compost that we could, and even trying our hand at making compost from our own food scraps. We became fascinated by finding better ways to water our garden. We found interest even in keeping a small worm farm so we could get worm castings, aka, yes, worm poop, because all of it we knew would help. And we also found a tool called a cultivator. The secret the farmer knows is that the soil always has potential for change, that with hard work, good practices that lead to better practices and formed habits, the soil becomes more fertile. No chemicals needed. A soil with weeds needs the weeds to be removed, and perhaps even a season of sunflowers planted, because sunflowers have an incredible ability to kill off anything else from growing in that bed. Followed perhaps by a season of rest, where then good compost is added during that rest and mixed in to produce good soil. A soil with rocks or harden needs a cultivator that will rip through the ground, adding much needed air and breath to the hardened dirt, and an easy ability for a farmer to come by and pick out and throw out the rocks. And it too needs some good compost. The soil always has the potential. Our souls always hold the potential. But here's what I love that I think oftentimes we miss in this story, in this parable. Because we get caught up in the state of the soil, and perhaps now we hold some hope of what we can do for our soil, of our souls to be changed, but we miss the work of the careless sower. Who is this careless sower? The gardener and farmers listening to Jesus telling this parable are probably baffled by this character. because they know that you work really hard to save and properly store seeds for another growing season, or you paid precious, valuable money to get these seeds. So when you plant these seeds, you plant them in soil that you know has the best chance for growth. So who is this careless sower who strews them about on hardened soil, on weed-riddled soil, on rocky soil, and good soil? I think perhaps we can figure that out. But I love this careless sower who clearly loves all and doesn't care about where the state of the soil is now, because that careless gardener understands the potential of all soil to become soil that produces 30, 50, 100 times the crop that was laid upon it in seed. The soil has potential to change, and the careless gardener, the careless sower, knows it. So I wonder, where do you find yourself today? Do you have rocky soil? The careless sower throws seeds upon your soul. Do you have a hard, packed soil? The careless sower throws seeds upon your soul. Is your soil overrun with weeds? The careless sower throws seeds upon your soul. Is your soil cultivated, ready for the seed? The careless sower throws seeds upon your soul. And that is good news. Hear the good news. Christ will never stop throwing seeds upon your soil. So lessons for the soil of our soul today. What do we need to do? The way that we cultivate, right, that cultivator tool that I talked about is one that is also such a practical term in what we're called to do to cultivate our walk with Christ. And we call these spiritual disciplines sometimes. They're practices. They're things that draw us closer to God and help us form habits to live a life of intention. So first, my invitation to you is to evaluate. What are you doing? You're watching this video right now. That counts. Do you have a church community? Do you need to search for one? Do you practice a time of prayer and silence? Do you need to add that into your life? Do you read scripture for your own life? Right? We could keep going, right? Anything that you think of that draws you closer to God. For some people, that's hiking in nature or taking a run through their neighborhood. For others, it can be the intent of time playfully present with their children and inviting God's presence into it, right? There's so many ways to draw close with intention towards God. So today, if we are realizing we have some weeds to deal with, some rocks to deal with, we begin by evaluating what are the practices that will cultivate. And like I said, the cultivator rips through the ground. Sometimes it is painful to change practices because we're changing our natural established habits we've had. And that can be hard work, but it's God honoring work. So this week, what do you need to do? What practice do you need to add into your life to start to cultivate your soil in your soul? My invitation to you is is do the evaluation, kind of evaluate, where are you? What do you need? And don't dive in and say, I'm going to add these 10 things, but choose one, add one, do it well, and then return again and again and keep adding small habit and practice, cultivating technique, composting technique. Build it up, but do one well and then progress to the next. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this helpful, if you want to see more videos like this, would you subscribe to this channel? Would you find someone that needs to hear good news, that the state of their soil can always be changed? Would you share it with them? And as we go, may you go knowing that the soil of your soul is deeply loved by Christ.